Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk.
Hi. Hello. How are you?
Fine. Just fine. We weren't in the middle of the conversation when we started that one this time.
We like had our shit together.
Sort of. But
to the extent that we ever do.
I'm totally going to recommend a book. I don't remember the subtitle or the author, but it's called What Fresh Hell Is This? And it's about perimenopause and menopause and stuff.
Nice.
But here's where it stands out from the other ones. First of all, the author has a sense of humor. Second of all,
always important.
The author is non-binary and has therefore done extensive research and made it so that it is a book that people who are not just, like cis white women going through their normal menopause. It's for everybody.
Yes.
And they do a really good job making that so. And it also appears in real life, right? They are a queer sex counselor.
Nice.
So, yeah, bring a very different element. They're also disabled. So instead of the very ableist way that a lot of people get spoken to about, say, menopause, well, then you should be exercising. And of course there are elements of it there because of course it's good for you. But they are quick to point out, they're like, but I understand that some people do not have the capacity or the capability to do that at this point. And so here are alternatives.
And when your hormones have you bent over and they're fucking you up the ass,
right?
Taking a walk doesn't always make it better.
Not always the magical thing. Well, and it's just like they're talking about, because unfortunately, if you are a smoker, it does make certain elements of perimenopause and menopause worse for you.
I did not know that.
And they were like, they're mad every time they have to say it. It's funny. So, because they said that they quit and then they were surprised to see, okay, shit, it really was way better, but they quit for a different reason. It was just, that's what ended up happening. And so they're like, there's little things where they'll do a checklist kind of at the end of the chapter. And they're like, okay, and for this particular problem, yes, quitting smoking will, and then in parentheses, God damn it, will work, stuff like
will
that.
Help.
So I'm reading a book about perimenopause, which is making me absolutely miserable. And not the book, the perimenopause, and laughing because they're funny.
If they can make you laugh at that, that's a good thing.
And they address things like because they're the sex counselor also, they go there. I'm just in that section now about sex and stuff, and I haven't reached a point where any of that has changed. But I am also already on hormones because I already had hormone issues well before I reached this point, and endometriosis and all this shit. So I'm kind of already pre-treating some of the things anyway, but they go into all of that, like, here are alternatives. Here are ways to be kinder to yourself. Here are ways that you don't have to say yes to penis and vagina sex just because you're supposed to, So just overall, really good book.
Nice.
I would recommend. I recommend it at work, and I am going to post it on Facebook.
I wish I had known about it, or if it had even existed.
Yeah, and I don't know how old
a few years ago when I was.
So, yeah.
The unexplained, unfathomable rage was what got me. You just, you Hulk out. You go from, this is a lovely day to, I have to incinerate everyone alive.
Correct.
In a second, and you don't know why. It's one thing to get mad because something, even if it's not reasonable, it's one thing to get mad if you can kind of go, well, this guy cut me off in traffic and then I dropped my keys in the sewer grate and 14 other things. But to just be sitting there.
My husband sneezed and I almost murdered him. Something like that. Where it's just it's incendiary, it's sudden, and then you're like, And
then you're crying.
Thing is, I'm conscious that it's happening, but I can't control it. And that bothers me most of all. I am mad, and I know that my decision right now should be, I'm going to go into a room and calm myself down, but somehow I am still going with whatever is happening right now. So, yeah, I don't like it. I don't enjoy it.
No.
And nobody talks about it. When I post it, there are some people who will respond and post openly about it. And a couple people were like, I'm so glad that you've posted some of this because I've just been dealing with this quietly. They don't post it, but they message me. And
some people deal with it for a lot longer than others.
Yes. So, for example, I was told I went into early perimenopause, and that does not mean early menopause, by the way. It means you're just in early perimenopause longer, or perimenopause longer. He was like, there's a slim chance that it could happen earlier for you. I highly doubt it. And that what annoys me is when I look at stuff, they're like, well, what did your mother go through? Because that's what you will. No, my mom finished menopause, got to menopause, and was like, oh yeah, I didn't even just my period stop one day. She didn't have any problems. She didn't have any side effects. She didn't.
I have a friend like that.
She recognized, and I'm like, I have all of them, but I've, again, always had hormonal issues because I'm estrogen dominant. I make way too much estrogen. It made me aggressive for a long time. And now, instead, I'm like, after I learned really hard how to fix that and got on hormones to even everything out, now the perimenopause comes along and my temper's back. And I hate that because I worked really hard to get to be a calmer person. And now I, once again, do not have control over it.
When I was in a book group, one of the women was talking about menopause, and her comment was, yeah, I felt cranky for 15 minutes and my period stopped and that was it. And we all looked at her and said, because some of the group, it was split about 50-50. So half of the group had already gone through it and half were younger. And everybody, the women who had all gone through it was like, well, you can just go fuck yourself.
Right.
I mean,
That's how I felt when I talked about periods, because when I was a teenager, I've always had severe issues, and I already had the endometriosis, I already had cysts, et cetera, et cetera. It was agony for me. I felt every element of ovulating, let alone my period, and it was painful to ovulate. And here they are with like a 1-day period and no cramps or whatever, and I'm like, I don't want to hear it from you.
What I have liked lately is that they have period cramp simulators. And they put them on men. Now, what I really like is when they get a guy and they get his girlfriend and they hook him up to both of them. Or his partner, whatever. It's man and a woman. They don't even have to know each other. I don't care. But they put it on, and when the man starts going, ow, and the woman's like,
seriously?
Yeah. The woman's just like, huh? And it goes all the way up. I think it goes up to 10. And the woman's like, well, yeah, it's uncomfortable. And the guy is writhing on the floor going, how do you stand it? And the woman is always like, what is my option?
What are we supposed to do? Not function for a week or whatever every single month, and longer for some people, and for me at times it was longer. And it's like, no, we can't. So you just deal with it.
Yeah. I used to get up in the middle of the night because I would have cramps, and I would take a handful of Advil and go sit in a rocking chair with a heating pad. And I remember one day, Joe was so disturbed. He goes, well, how many Advil do you take? I said, I don't know because I don't turn the bathroom light on. I just pour a few in my hand to take. And he's like, that's not how that's supposed to work.
That's how you die from ibuprofen.
I mean, I wasn't taking like 10 of them. I was taking like 4. So, but yeah, he would wake up in the night and come looking because I would be sitting in the living room rocking.
Right.
Which I was happy when we got a rocking chair. It makes it easier. I would just be sitting on the edge of the couch, rocking, hunched over, miserable.
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't touch my legs or anything because my legs would hurt the entire time too. And so like, paying thanks for that. But yeah, I liked because the Try Guys did the pregnancy simulation thing, I think, where it was contractions that the machine was showing them. And
nice.
Oh boy, were they screaming.
Good.
And it'd be like, now, be Katie Holmes and have your Scientologist husband tell you you're not allowed to make a peep during childbirth.
I would have torn out his trachea.
I would have long before I let that fucker impregnate me, but yeah. Like he hadn't shown his whole ass to her at some point before that, yes. I'm sure. But yeah. So it's always fun to watch those videos where they get that. And I'm like, it hurts, don't it? And yeah, we go to work, we parent, we do all our shit.
And I think it's really hard. It's difficult for a woman who wants to call into work and say, I have cramps so bad I can't come to work. If she's talking to a woman who either didn't experience it that way or is like, fuck you, I'm here with my cramps. Right. You can work.
Also female gynecologists.
Do they not?
No.
Oh.
I actually have had better luck with male gynecologists in my life. which is interesting. And I know that's not, again, feasible for everybody to even be able to go to. But no, I always got listened to more. I went through several female gynecologists before I got to this male who was on the verge of retiring. He was an old curmudgeon, and he was the one who finally did the laparoscopy to find the endometriosis that at that point had spread to the surrounding organs because it had been ignored by the female gynecologist for so long, who would tell me, some of us are just more sensitive to pain. I would like...
No.
I would like to cause some of them some pain.
Yes.
I'll just put it that way instead of what I almost said.
No, I'm with you. I could read that look and I'm like, oh, is she going there?
I had to pause. Be like, I would just like to cause them pain and not do the very specific threat I was about to throw out.
So, to everyone who has ever said to myself or to Shannon, gosh, you just have no filter. I would like you to be aware at this moment that both of us have very good, very functional filters, because if we didn't,
we would have a lot more to say.
Oh my God. If we didn't have filters, you don't realize people who are sassy most of them,
right,
have filters.
And they just think like really intense things they don't voice to you.
Yeah, think of the shit they're not saying. If you're impressed by what they say, think of the shit they're swallowing and not, they're keeping in their soul to release at some future point.
Have I mentioned that I've been watching Moonlighting, like the original Bruce
Willis,
Sybil Shepherd Moonlighting? So I went in knowing, because people were like, oh, I tried to watch it. You know, he's a bit misogynistic. And I'm like, no shit. Considering when and the type of character he's playing, honestly, he's the worst in the first episode. And then he does little sexual comments and stuff like that throughout. Whatever. I went in knowing that I was watching that era. And in fact, when you get past that, as I realized a lot of people can't, they are actually like really excellent friends.
Nice.
They become very protective of each other in it. And there are some really sweet moments with them. But it's funny as fuck. It's also meta because, like, I don't know if they originated this sort of thing, breaking the fourth wall. And they'll talk like, or do a little wink at the audience or do all this. And then they're meta on themselves. Like at one point, it was the season finale of season 2, I think. I think we just started season 3 episode.
I'm going to write down Moonlighting so I can go.
It's on Hulu, I think, is where we're watching it. So anyway, they have this whole goofy ass thing where they run out of the room and they run off the set into the back where all the people are doing the stuff and then run out and hop into the cart outside of
the golf cart.
Yes. And that episode had Whoopi Goldberg and Judd Nelson guest starring. The number of people you'll see.
Oh my God.
Sorvino was in an episode.
I can't wait.
Yes. So we've been really enjoying that as like our mindless, like, let's relax. We don't have time to watch a movie, but we have time to watch an episode or two. But they did. And there was an episode that had us laughing so hard. And I think it was near the end of season 1 or the beginning of season 2 when they really like came into their oats and realized this is what people liked. And got goofier.
Nice.
Because it took itself a little more seriously when it began.
Of
and then
course.
like the second season, they were like, nah. So, highly recommend. It's been a lot of fun.
Recently, I watched the latest Indiana Jones movie. Mm-hmm. Did you see it?
Yeah, with the Fleabag.
Yes.
Actress.
So, we watched it in 2 sittings. I actually watched it with my friend Frida. Because it's 2.5 hours. So we watched the first hour, and then she was like, I'm tired, I have to go to bed. No problem. So we came back to it a couple days later. And it's sort of, I did not think it was the best movie in the...
No.
Because it's effect, a crumb of plot. Effect, a crumb of plot. And we were sitting there, and I was like, does he fight somebody on top of a train in every Indiana Jones movie?
Close.
He's done it at least once before. And then we were like they're out at sea and they scuttle a boat and jump on another boat and drive off. And there's a whole ocean and they're taking off. And the villain looks at the sub-villain and says, aha, they're going east. They must be going to blah, blah, blah. Based on fucking nothing. And then they go there and they're there. There's so much coincidence. I'm like, wow, who wrote this? I mean, if you love Indiana Jones, it's worth watching. It had a nice little wrap up at the end.
Yeah, like if
it was sweet, but
have that affection for it, it's worth watching.
Yes,
but I
definitely.
haven't gone back and watched it an additional time since I saw it. And that's saying something for an Indiana Jones movie, which I will watch the first... Well, the first
three.
2, possibly 3. I watched the third one last. That is some people's favorites.
Which one was the third one?
Sean Connery, I think, is the third one.
Oh, I did like the
Scout.
interaction between the two. That I did like that.
But my favorite is the one. It's funny. There's like a handful of us for whom this is the favorite, and everybody else is like, Raiders is the best idiot. Like there are whole arguments online about this, and there's some of us who are like, I really like the Temple of Doom. I love the Temple of Doom because it was his most horror leaning one.
Yes,
it was dark. It was fucking crazy. It was ridiculous. It was over the top, and I absolutely love it. I always like that one the best. I'll watch Raiders, at least once a year, but Temple of Doom is my favorite.
Yeah. So the most recent one I just went, and it was funny because she'd asked me, do you want to watch a movie? I said, sure, let's watch a movie. And she really wanted to watch Leave the World Behind.
Oh.
So I said to her, okay, I read the book. I can't see how they could get all the subtlety of the book into a movie.
Yeah,
and
it was by telling you.
I said, I have not heard from anybody I trust that they have seen the movie.
I've seen the movie.
Oh, did you?
The ending was irritating. I was irritated with the little girl character.
Did you read the book?
I didn't like Julia Roberts' character.
Because there's no concrete, and it's a very ambiguous ending of the book.
Yes. My thing is ambiguous. I don't have a problem with ambiguous endings.
I do, but I liked it in the book.
I felt that they left too much hanging of the actual storyline versus we don't need to know who or what is happening. But there were other things that they were just like, it felt like they were in the middle of some shit that needed to be closed out. Yeah. And I don't know what to say to not do a spoiler, so I can't even elaborate on that, but on air. But
although this comes out,
I got annoyed by the amount they thought that they needed to have one of the characters tell the audience as a theory because they thought people were too dumb to get what they were getting at.
And this comes out on December 27th, so most of the people who are going to watch it will have watched it by then. I feel
still that's way too soon.
But yeah, so in the book, it was not a father-daughter who came. It was a husband and wife, and they were an older couple. I mean, they weren't in their 70s, but they were an older
I actually liked it being the father and daughter because they had that kind of interaction that would have been different than if it were spouses, right? But
yeah.
But also, I liked her I liked her way better than I liked Julia Roberts' bitchy fucking character. And it gave a contrast between Julia Roberts' kids and how they behaved and how this other girl behaved. I mean, she was I think she was meant to be in her early 20s.
Right.
She wasn't a teenager, but...
So I saw a clip from the movie. Somebody posted it on TikTok, maybe. And it's the ocean liner coming up to the beach. So here's my thing. The ocean liner is coming toward the beach and they decide they need to run. So where do they run? They run straight in front of the ocean liner instead of running away from it. And I was like, what fucking dumbass does that? It made no sense. When something is a threat, you don't run in front of it, you run away. That just really, and that scene wasn't in the book.
Okay.
So I was like,
they needed visuals, right?
I was talking to a friend, the one whose kids we were decorating cookies with yesterday. She had read the book more recently. I said, was that scene with the boat in the book? And she said, no, it was not. So I said, okay, because I was all, wow, I've forgotten more of this than I realized. But
so it was funny because Ethan Hawke is in it and Kevin Bacon is in it. And I had no idea that people confuse the two. I don't even...
No.
Ethan Hawke is finally growing on me. I never have liked him before. Something about him has always irked me. And I don't know what it is. I can't explain what it is. But he's starting to grow on me a little bit. Once he switched to horror and didn't seem so full of himself, I it got better. I have adored Kevin Bacon forever, right?
Forever and ever.
So I'm sitting there and people confuse them?
I don't see it.
I consider Kevin Bacon kind of the sexy ugly. He's not ugly, but he's not... classically handsome, and yet he's sexy. Not Ethan Hawke. So there's a problem for me there too.
Who does Kevin Bacon play?
He is some kind of maybe like a prepper, a guy who's been prepared for it, who Julia Roberts sees early in the movie, like getting bottles of water, and then it turns out the guy whose house they're in was him.
That was a character in the book.
So he's that character. And I was like, I don't disagree with anything he's saying here, you know, so.
In the book, all the hints were so subtle and so
There's
well
nothing
done.
subtle in this movie. It's, I felt certain elements of it kind of beat you about the head. Again, I felt like I was being told this is what I was supposed to think it was at this point, instead of being open for me to go, ooh, could it be this or could it be that? So yeah, that annoyed me. But anyway, so I saw them in like a BuzzFeed or something like that video, and they had to sit there together and they would zoom in on something like a forehead or an ear or a chin or an eye, and they had to figure out which one of them it was, and they could not for the lives of them pass this game. It was pretty amazing to watch. I was like, I actually did really good on it, but again, I do not see a similarity much between them. And also, like, the first one was their forehead. They have each have very distinctive and different wrinkles from that. Well, Kevin Bacon only has frown lines. Two frown lines here. Ethan Hawke has one long one that goes up from his nose and up through his forehead, and then multiple across then the forehead. Kevin Bacon doesn't have those yet. He only has like a rumpled brow when he makes an expression that rumples it.
That's because he's happy.
You know what, though? I watched those videos through COVID of he and Kira Sedgwick at their farm, and they seem really happy and really chill people. And so probably, but then Ethan Hawke actually in interviews seems very chill as well. So I don't know, but yeah, Kevin Bacon had way less of the lines.
And the new season of Reacher is out.
Yes, I haven't watched it yet, though.
So as we're recording this, it's only the first episode is out. But I decided this is nice to look at. So I'm rewatching the first season because I can have it on. I actually had it on while I was working on the podcast because I don't have to pay my full attention to it. And I was like, he just has really nicely defined biceps.
Well, it was funny because the only reason I knew, and then I'll start because we're running long, but the only reason I knew it was even the new I haven't seen an ad or anything telling me that it was bad, was somebody posted and they were like, whoever cast Tom Cruise originally as Reacher in the movies obviously hadn't been near a Lee Child book ever. What were they thinking? And then there was a whole conversation under there about, oh yeah, this new guy is way more like the character described in the book. So, and I was like, oh, is Reacher back? And then I looked and I was like, yes, look at that.
Yep. I can't wait to watch the new season. But I have to finish the old one first.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was like, I need to refresh my memory because I remember as it progressed, the shit that was happening in that town just got crazier and crazier. And I won't do the spoiler. Somebody ends up dead that I remember when it was a cliffhanger at the end of an episode, and I went, well, shit, I thought he was the one killing everybody. Oh, well.
All right.
What do I know? All right, what you got good?
So I'm doing a heist. This was the Manhattan Savings Institute heist.
You're just enunciating heist so precisely.
It's still considered the biggest heist in New York.
Wow.
All right. In my opinion, one of the largest heists ever successfully pulled off was planned by a man who wasn't even there when it went down. George Leonidas Leslie was his name, was born in 1842, the first American in his family who had immigrated from England 2 years before. His father was eventually able to move them from New York to Ohio, where he started a brewery in Cincinnati, which became a great success and fulfilled Leslie's American dream. Like, reading these stories, this was the time where the American dream was being fulfilled by people, because there's two people in here who immigrated here and found success.
Do you know what the brewery was called?
I do not. It didn't, there wasn't, they didn't even have the actual date of George Leslie's birth.
That's what.
Just the year he was born.
So that's, that is where my interest lies. What was the beer?
What was the brewery? I know, I was curious. I was like, is it something that's still going?
Yeah.
So, but I do not know. George went to school with aspirations of becoming an architect, and when he was drafted into the Civil War, his father was able to buy his way out of it for $300 because they were well off, allowing George to continue in his studies, though also bringing shame upon his head. George graduated. He graduated with honors. He aced this and opened his own architectural firm. But when his parents died in 1867, he sold everything, including his firm and the brewery, and moved to New York City. And this did take time. He didn't move to New York in 1867. It takes time to sell 2 businesses and a family home and his home. And unfortunately, the city had been ravaged by the war, and the gangs were basically running it at that time. The police just kind of looked the other way. To give you an image of New York at the time, the Brooklyn Bridge had they just started building it. Wow. So it was that kind of skeleton there over on one side. There were army forts taking up threatening space in the city, like... They said they were looming over all the homes and people living on the streets. Sure enough, George got sucked into the gang life, finding success from his knowledge of architecture, rapidly climbing the ranks. Yeah, he went there and there was this crime everywhere. And then he was like, I'm going to be a criminal.
Alrighty.
And there's nothing ever that ever shows why he would make this choice.
Because
why sell your successful firm because your parents died? Why go to New York? Did he go to New York to do this? There's nothing out there.
Huh.
Nobody knows. I know. Now, in addition to those suffering from the war, there were men of great wealth making their way into the city and building it up. Industry and railroads had made plenty of money for plenty of people, even as others had suffered and lost everything. And New York, and really in general, the East Coast at that time, like New England, became a great place of great disparity. You have people living on the streets wearing their uniforms from the Civil War, right? And then you have these rich industrialists and railroad barons and all of these people, and they're building these utopias for themselves around this wreckage from the Civil War. It's like, I would love to see just like, if there had been a photographer that went around and captured the essence of this, people in these nice suits with their top hats or whatever, bowler hats, whatever they were wearing then, and these homeless folks, it just fascinates me. So, this gave the gangs people to target. It was actually people, it was like people moved to New York to be on Broadway now. At that time, they were moving to New York to rob the rich. Well, and there were rankings. There were tiers of criminals in New York at the time.
Wow.
Why George opted to rob these folks instead of, say, setting up an architecture business and taking advantage of them building their mansions and skyscrapers is a mystery. But he wasn't there to make his money in a legitimate way, period. He and his wife, who we met at 28 when she was 15. He was 28, she was 15, in case that sentence isn't clear. The daughter of his landlord, when he was staying somewhere, he had some money from liquidating his and his parents' assets.
I would hope so.
Right? And they were able to play at being socialites. And as far as she knew, they were socialites. With him using his charm to wrangle them invitations to the parties and events of the powerful. If they had a bank, if they went to somebody and he had a bank, he was sometimes able to get them to show him blueprints just by saying, oh, I'm an architect. And I had these honors. And
he knows
I
how
would
to talk
love
the
to
talk.
see this, to see how I did it, because I was going to open my own bank. And I would love to see how you've laid it out. And these people would be like, of course.
Yep.
And they would show him the blueprints. While he was making the powerful friends and studying their blueprints, he was also building his own gang of bank robbers. He was choosing the best of the best, including a man named Tom Draper. He also made a powerful friend in the underworld, a woman named Frederica Mandelbaum, a Jewish immigrant born in Germany. Mandelbaum arrived in the U.S. in 1850 with her husband, Wolf. That was his first name, with an E. While they came here with no money and were peddlers going door to door to sell items they'd scavenged off the streets, they were eventually able to open up a dry goods store. Like they saved and they scrounged, right? Again, American dream type stuff here. But Frederica had bigger things in mind. She wanted more. And she started a criminal enterprise running out of the back of the store that eventually grew to such proportions that her crew was responsible for some of the biggest heists at the time and were rivals of one of the other major local gangs, the Grady Gang. Those would have been Irish, I assume.
One would think.
But I was like, is this gangs in New York? What's happening? And I was like, I bet it's about similar time frame. But she also rubbed elbows with the high society folks, just like Leslie, and was known to host elaborate dinner parties. On the side, she opened a street school to teach youngsters how to pickpocket successfully. Like they called her Marm. Everybody called her Marm. That was her thing. She was powerful. They knew who she was. She and George Leslie both had police and judges in the pocket. She had more so. She was more powerful than he was, I think. But he was only focused on this one thing. And she was kind of like she was an entrepreneur.
She was branching out.
And I was like, what was her husband doing all this? Because he is never included in this, but he wasn't dead as far as I can tell. Like he was just running their dry goods store. And while his wife ran around being a criminal mastermind. And I love that.
Maybe he was pretty.
Maybe.
And she had him doing the basics, taking care of the dry goods store.
Right.
And she was like, don't worry your little head about it.
Don't worry your pretty little head. I've got this. We have money. She had outgrown the store and owned some warehouses. She owned several, this big chunk of warehouses in Brooklyn, which allowed her to store and fence merchandise, right? Luckily for George, they became friendly, and she allowed him to use her warehouse space, and in it, he would build scale models of the places he intended to do his heists because he was a fucking architect. Yes. George wasn't always able to get his hands on blueprints of places. They didn't all hand it over, or, he maybe couldn't get in there. But when he couldn't, he would just go to the banks, open an account, get a safety deposit box, and so he could go kind of case it on his own. This would allow him to look around the bank, get his bearings, and then he'd make up his own blueprints by what he'd looked at. Being there in person also allowed him to seek out the weak spots. They said he had this keen ability to find the weaknesses in what they had built and what these architects had done. He was very good at his job.
He could have been in security. He could have gone in and sold them on, here's what you need to do.
Mm-hmm. No, he made a choice.
Yeah, he did.
He would find safes on the black market, and then he just had a bunch of safes there in the warehouses. Okay. Frederica let him have. And he was finding them on the black market, and then he and his crew could practice breaking into them, and so they were learning all the safes. He also made models of the vaults to figure out one by one, so the same size and measurements and everything, to figure out how to get into them, because you would have to get into the vault, and then there would be a safe, is how they usually did it. And in fact, he's widely thought to be the inspiration behind all of the heist movies, that he was the one who was doing the shit you see them doing that's smart in the heist movies. In the warehouses, he'd arrange furniture the same as in the bank he'd visited. He would go and get all that stuff, and she gave him all this space, and he could just lay out the bank there.
Wow.
And then he'd turn out the lights and use a stopwatch to train whatever crew he'd chosen, because he would handpick for each job. And he was doing them in multiple states.
Wow.
Yes, this guy was amazing, and I'm like, you wasted what you had, but I guess did he waste it? Because he was making money and he was a socialite.
Yeah, he was.
So, yes. This, of course, was after he'd broken into the banks in question to confirm he had everything down. So he would go and he'd visit, he would open his account, he would check it out, then he would break in after he'd studied it. And he would do this multiple times before the heist, and they would never know he'd broken in. He would just leave, lock everything up, and go.
Smart.
Yes. This allowed him to try out combinations if he happened to get them ahead of time. There were often security guards and other employees who would sell this information to begin with, and he was also good at getting that kind of stuff. And he would be able to go in and just check everything out, see where everything was, see what the safe was. And it also allowed him to use something called the Little Joker, which was very popular. I read an entire article about who created it, and there's actually an argument between who.
Okay, it sounds like a sex toy.
It's not. It was a sort of wire and paper and sometimes a metal disc get up. Very simple little thing. And it would be stuck. They would take off the dial, put it behind it, put the dial back on. Nobody knew it was under there.
Oh.
And so when they turned it and did the combinations,
they could see.
It presses things in the way that thing, and there would be dents or puncture marks, and they could figure out what numbers had been used and then just find the order. So that was called the Little Joker. It was the Little Jerker. That's even more of a sex toy. So he'd put that little Joker in the first time he broke into the bank on his own, and then he'd go back on a subsequent visit and take it with him. Yep. These methods were so successful that it's felt he pulled off 80% of the successful bank heists in the area during his time there. So
God
he
damn.
even went well over and above Puerto Rico when it came to like heists, but she was again doing...
She
diversified
diversified
her business.
We both came up with
That's
the same
right.
word. Diversified.
His crew traveled to different states to do these heists, going after the rich folks who had settled along the East Coast, like I said earlier. They'd travel separately, stay in different places, never talk to each other, so that there was absolutely no suspicion there, and carry out their crimes equipped with costumes he'd stolen from places. Like, there was a big one that he did in Maine, and it was one of the more famous ones he did. And he had gotten the costumes from the New York Opera. He'd stolen them from the New York Opera.
Nice.
And so they were all dressed very nice. Had mustaches and wigs and all sorts of things. In this way, they robbed major banks in places like Maine, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Massachusetts. Each of these heists were preceded by him visiting the area and the banks ahead of time and wandering the city near the banks, because he would also get to know, he felt that you needed to know the architectural as well as the urban setup around it. And so he would wander the streets finding... Where can we escape? Where is a good backup to go if we can't escape in this direction?
How organized. He should have been a project director.
Astoundingly. I'm reading this and I'm like, dude, you were mind-blowingly smart
Yes.
and capable, and this is how you choose to use it. Okay. Throughout this, George's wife thought he was conducting legitimate business, though she did eventually find out he was actually robbing banks, and by that time, she was so enamored with her life that she was like, cool, keep doing it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for him, his wife and his henchman, Draper, George had gotten cocky in more ways than one.
Uh-oh.
Literally.
Comes back to the sex
That's
toys,
right.
doesn't it?
The little jerker. Now I got to invent that. He'd started running around with other women and spending his considerable cash on them. One of those women appears to have been Tom Draper's wife.
Oops.
One of his henchmen. Wanting more and more, he started doing consultations for other gangs. Basically, he would go to them for a fee, and he would plan out their heist the same way he planned out his. And so he was a consultant. He was paid. His own gang felt they got a little irked. Like, they felt like he was being a traitor. They felt he was too distracted also with this and his many affairs, and that so things started, he seemed to be moving more distantly from them, and he wasn't as on top of things as he was before, because he had diversified too much, perhaps. Despite his side jobs, he had been planning a massive heist for 3 years, which his crew knew about. They'd been doing their exercises. They already knew all the stuff about the inside. They had their sights set on the Manhattan Savings Institution. He had done his usual thing and prepared the crew. They were getting ready. They had, I think, even the date set. Good to go. Along came May 10th, 1878, when he showed up at home and told his wife that things had gone terribly wrong and he feared he would be assassinated.
Ooh.
He gave her a bunch of money and took off back to work, and later that month, he disappeared. On June 4th, his body turned up hidden in a bush at Tramps Rock in Yonkers. He'd been shot twice in the back of his head, and I was unclear because they were like, he was shot twice, once behind each ear, and then once, like, under his nose or something. I'm like, from the back or the front? Was that an exit wound?
Yeah.
I don't know. So, his elbow was resting on a rock, and a revolver and hat had been laid on it. There was no blood at the scene, indicating he hadn't been killed there. He also clearly hadn't killed himself, though it was set up to look like he had. So I was like, it was a bit ridiculous, the setup they did. Like,
yeah.
how do you think he shot himself in the back of the head there, guys?
And then laid his hat on top. Yeah, no.
I read an article about it. It was fun because it broke down all the clothing he was wearing. You know how many layers you had on back then? There was like his vest made of the same material as this and he had this hat. It also mentioned that he had like gold elements, buttons and stuff. Because he was showing that he had the money.
He was a fancy man.
He was. And the article was like, he was a John Doe at the time because no ID was found on him. And they were like, suicide, murder are both possibilities, but police are leaning toward murder. And I'm like, no shit. He was dressed well, said to have been in good physical shape. A hatter's mark on the hat led them to the haberdasher, but the man they initially identified from that wasn't the right guy. That's the thing, is that back then, like, all the clothes had a distinctive stamp, and you would have had to, in most cases, go to that store to get the thing. And so it was easier to track down now, where we're all ordering from Amazon.
And if he was well-to-do, he probably had everything custom made, and they would have had to measure him. And yes. Okay.
They did eventually trace something on his person to one of his aliases and to finally identify him, but there really wasn't. I searched around. I couldn't find good information on it. There is a whole book I could have read.
Yeah.
I was doing this last night, and I don't know how fast it says through that. He was buried June 10th, 1878. The crime unsolved, but most people think it was Tom Draper who took him out. And that would have been for a multitude. The wife, the traitor thing, he was just done with him, perhaps. Maybe more than one of them were. Who knows? Even with George dead, he'd done his due diligence and prepared the crew, and on October 27th, 1878, George's crew broke in at about 6 a.m. and managed to make it out with $3.5 million.
Wow.
Which articles said anywhere from 60 to 70 million in today's money. To their dismay, only about 12,000 of that was cash, with the rest in negotiable and registered bonds. 2 different kinds of bonds, which they didn't really know how to move. And it was interesting. This is an aside. I didn't write it down because there was this whole freaking book because there is a whole book. It does sound very interesting. I need to go find what it was. About how all of these robberies were being done these days. There were, again, a lot of crime because of the disparity. And what they would do when there were bonds in it is the bank would know that after this robbery occurred, they would be getting contacted, and it would be kind of like a hostage situation, but with the bonds. And they would have to pay out to get the bonds back or something. Like this whole thing would happen, and it was totally normal, and I want to know more about that. The bank itself had been considered impregnable, and the heist became known as the Great Bank Robbery in the press. That's just what they called it, because everyone knew exactly what they were talking about. To get in, the crew had broken into janitor Louis Werkel's apartment on the 2nd floor. They were masked and wearing business suits. They bound and gagged his wife and his mother-in-law at gunpoint, then forced him to let them in and use the combination he knew to get into the vault, tying him up afterward. They then employed their 2 top safecrackers, Jimmy Hope and Samuel Parris, and it's thought that Jimmy Hope kind of ran this heist now that George was gone, who got into the vault and got out of the building only to disappear onto the streets. Werkel freed himself and notified the police within an hour. Because of the skill needed to break into the safe, the police had ideas of who to go after.
Yeah.
They felt there were only like 6 men who were capable of pulling this off. Safecrackers were felt to be at the top of that tier of career criminals I talked about, and only a handful of men were thought capable. And so it's very easy to narrow that down and start looking at them, right? The crew had started falling apart by the time they were captured, but ultimately 10 men were arrested, including Hope and his son. Jimmy and his son were convicted. His son he maintained to the end, his son wasn't even there.
Okay.
As well as a man named Bill Kelly, but the rest all were released and let off. Hope maintained that his son was innocent, did no good. Hope escaped prison, and I tried to find, I was like, was his son just still in prison? And he continued his ways. He got in trouble, all this stuff. I could have probably done a whole thing on him because he had famous heists before this as well. And that's why George Leslie had pulled him in, because he was good at what he did. The majority of the money was never recovered, even after they pulled the 10 men in. So that's a whole shit ton of money that might still be out there.
That is.
My sources were Crime Reads, New York Post article by Jeff Manoff, Manaugh, from his book, A Burglar's Guide to the City. And that's not the book that I wanted to read more about, though, I think, but it could be interesting, too. And then Wikipedia, which is where I looked up stuff on George himself. All the other articles were just about the heist. And then to find out stuff about him, and then Jimmy Hope, who I looked up, for example, because none of the articles listed what happened to the dudes who did it.
Yeah.
They were all just about the heist and very basic. All the articles I could, because I found like old newspaper articles too. No, but then I stumbled across Jimmy Hope when I was doing the search stuff, and that's how I got information about what happened to them and how they even pulled off the robbery. That wasn't even in the articles.
That's ridiculous.
So on this one, I actually weirdly had to rely on Wikipedia for the 3 main people I covered, because Frederica, I looked her up too, because I found her quite interesting. I would love to read a book about her criminal enterprises. She had a monthly dinner for like the high society. And just
for the people she robbed.
Yes. It's fascinating to me the way that the power that they had at the time, and how they were high society too, because they were the only other ones who had money because they were stealing it.
Yeah, I would want to read about her. Why haven't we had a movie about her?
Mm-hmm.
I would watch that. Of course, they would put some young leggy blonde in the role.
And this heist is still, so it's the biggest in New York ever, possibly in the U.S., I think.
Wow.
But it's also like one of the top 3 or so in like the world in terms of how much they took at that time.
Fascinating. And I think I have read about that because occasionally I look at, maybe I'll do a heist and I'll look, but I want what you have.
It's hard to find a good heist.
You have to find one that's interesting, that's not just, they stole a lot. You know, they either had to have, like the Great Maple Syrup robbery.
There was a different one I almost did too called the Baker Street robbery that I might do. So we'll see in the future. But if I do have to combine it with some other things.
Okay.
I wasn't sure.
So, well, like last week when I talked about the development of Lonely Hearts ads and how they turned into personal ads. Sometimes you just got to add a little extra. Sometimes when we go down the rabbit hole, we have to tell everybody what was in that rabbit hole.
For example, Frederica wasn't mentioned in most of the articles. But one, I mentioned her and I was like, what? And so I went and looked her up. And then she had her own thing going. And again, Jimmy Hope was only mentioned in one. But it was where I got all that information. So very interesting people involved in this.
Yeah. That sounds like, you should write a novel about those people. Because I would like to read that.
Frederica.
Yes. So I am going to talk about the Moorhouse murders. Because we're at the ass end of 2023. It's been a hard year for a lot of people. So I wanted to end the year with a positive note. So this is a survivor story. So 3 cheers for survivor story, but there's still plenty of gruesome details before we get to the survivor. So if you're here for the gruesome, you won't be disappointed.
All right.
So first we head to the land down under. And no, I'm not going to sing the song. Don't beg. I'm saying to someone who has heard me sing. So we're going to the suburbs of Perth. So David Burney was born in February of 1951. He was the oldest. He eventually had 4 other siblings. And to say that his family was considered dysfunctional is almost an understatement. Local rumors included alcoholism, promiscuity, and incest. I could not find, alcoholism, we all get that, but promiscuity, I'm like, who? Who were they accusing of that? I'm like, and who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares who somebody else is sleeping with? But the incest is kind of, ratchet.
I would say that's problematic.
Yeah, that is problematic. The family, this killed me that this detail has made it into the historical record. The family did not eat meals together as the parents did not cook for their children. So I'm like, how did they even grow up?
Well, there's a shit ton of, neglected kids figure out how to scrounge and scavenge.
So David left, I'm like, where did I go? He left school at the age of 15 to apprentice as a jockey, but couldn't keep his shit together. He abused the horses, which that's a fucking huge no-no in the racing world. You don't abuse the horses. But he also had a little problem with exhibitionism. Like walking around without his pants on. He once put a stocking over his head and wearing just the stocking and nothing else, attempted to rape an elderly woman at the boarding house where he was staying. He was in and out of prison as an adolescent and as an adult was addicted to sex and pornography, and he was also a paraphiliac. Rabbit hole. Because I said, I don't know what that is. So I'm going to look it up and I'm going to educate people. So, while at Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem, we don't believe in kink shaming of any kind. I just had to look this up because I did not know what it was. So, in the interest of educating our listeners, paraphilia is the experience of recurring or intense sexual arousal to atypical objects, situations, fantasies, behaviors, or individuals. It has also been defined as, a little bit more simply, sexual interest in anything other than a consenting human partner. Yeah. You're welcome.
And then each of the things has like its own name, like the people who get turned on by cars.
Yes. There are so many there are like thousands of subcategories.
And they probably still don't have everything covered.
No, probably not. So I didn't see anything other than saying he was also a paraphiliac. And I was like, where's this proof? So, okay. So that's David. So now we're going to turn our attention to Catherine Margaret Harrison, who was eventually Catherine Burney. She was born in May of 51, and her mother died 2 years later, giving birth to a son who also died. Her father turned her over to the custody of her maternal grandparents, but then he had to fight them to get custody back when she was 10.
Why do you want custody
I don't know. It did not say. I'm like, what? But you can't just throw that down. Catherine met David Burney when she was 12 and started a relationship with him at the age of 14. Keep in mind, he was also 14. They were born the same year. It's not great, but it's not as uber creepy as he was 38 and she was 15 when they met. Her father begged her to leave him, but she didn't listen, and she did end up in juvie. She got in a lot of trouble through her association with David. But she met a parole officer who kind of supported her and encouraged her, and she found employment with the McLaughlin family as a housekeeper. She married their son Donald on her 21st birthday, and they went on to have 7 children together. They made a big deal about the fact that their first child was killed when he was hit by a car when he was a year old. Like, that was mentioned 3 or 4 times. I'm like, why? But they just mentioned the fact of it. So anyway, they had 7 children together. This, not with David. This is with the son of the family she worked for. She got away from David, and she had 7 kids with Donald. But in 1985, she walked away from her family and restarted her relationship with David Burney. The following year, in 1986, the Burneys, they were not married. She legally changed her name to Burney, but I don't think she ever divorced her husband. Anyway, in 1986, the Burneys imploded and lost their fucking minds. They moved into the Moorhouse neighborhood outside of Perth. So that's why these are called the Moorhouse murders, because that was the neighborhood they lived in. In October, 22-year-old college student Mary Nielsen met David at a car shop where he worked. He offered to sell her tires for her car at a big discount. And I'll get you this great deal, these cheap tires, and gave her his number. So she reached out to him, and she showed up at the Moorhouse home where she was gagged, chained to a bed, and raped by David while Catherine watched. And some of the accounts say that Catherine took notes. Yeah. I don't know why, but they took her to another neighborhood where she was raped again and then strangled. David stabbed her, believing it would help speed up decomp if she had been stabbed. And then Catherine helped to bury her.
Opening it up for the insects?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, a shallow grave is a shallow grave, and it doesn't hide much, and it doesn't hide it for long. So 2 weeks later, 15-year-old Susanna Candy was hitchhiking when the Burneys picked her up. They immediately tied her up and held her at knife point. When they took her back to Moorhouse, they forced her to write letters to her family saying that she was okay. She got the exact same treatment as Nielsen. This time, when they tried to strangle her with a nylon cord, they failed. So they forced her to take sleeping pills, and once she was unconscious, David insisted Catherine strangle her to prove her love for him. So she did. She later said she did it, quote, because I wanted to see how strong I was within my inner self. I didn't feel a thing. It was like I expected. I was prepared to follow him to the end of the earth and do anything to see that his desires were satisfied. She was a female. Females hurt and destroy males. End quote.
Wow.
Yeah. There's nothing fucked up in that psychology at all. On November 1st, 31-year-old Nolene Patterson was on her way home from work. She worked as a bar manager when she ran out of gas. The Burneys picked her up, took her to Moorhouse Street, and David raped her multiple times. However, David grew attached to this woman and kept her captive for 3 days instead of killing her immediately. Catherine was not having it. She gave David an ultimatum. He had to kill Noeline or Catherine would kill herself. They forced the sleeping pills on her again, and David strangled her when she was unconscious, and then they buried her together. On November 5th, Now, you can see these are all so very close together. On November 5th, 21-year-old Denise Brown was waiting at a bus stop when the Bernies grabbed her. They took her to Moorhouse Street. You know the drill. But this one took a turn. They drove her to a pine plantation where David raped her again in the car while they were waiting for it to get dark enough to kill and bury her. He dragged her into the woods, raped her again, and then stabbed her in the neck. They put the body in a shallow grave. Then she sat up because David didn't do a very good job. So David grabbed an axe, struck her twice in the head, and they buried her again. They actually killed her the second time. On November 9th, 17-year-old Kate Moore, it's Moir, so I'm not, Moore. I'm going to say Moore. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. She was kidnapped at knife point and taken back to Moorhouse again. This time, David held a knife to her throat and forced her to call her parents to tell them she was okay. Kate told her mother she'd drunk too much and needed to sleep it off at a friend's house. She was hoping that her mother would clue into the fact that she didn't drink.
Right.
But her mom just accepted her at her word. Now, I don't know if she had siblings. I don't know a lot about her home life or her mom, but if your child is generally responsible and they call you and tell you, I've had too much to drink, but I'm going to do the responsible thing and stay here at my friend's house and sleep it off, you might be disappointed that they're drinking, but you're happy.
But you're like, okay, and you were responsible enough to let me know. And that stays with your character in terms of that.
Exactly.
I know you didn't want to drink before, but there's always a first. Right.
Yes.
So I can see why she wouldn't think that was crazy.
Yes. So for whatever reason, the Bernies did not kill Kate that night. She was forced to sleep in their bed between them, handcuffed, chained at her ankle to David. They also forced her to take sleeping pills, but she slipped them under her tongue instead of swallowing them. And she was later able to spit them out and conceal them under the mattress. Y'all can't see I am gesturing, spitting them out and hiding them under the mattress, because that's not ridiculous. But remember that detail. The next morning, Catherine went to answer the door to conduct a drug deal, and she forgot to chain Kate to the bed. Kate was able to shimmy out through the bathroom window, hitting her head on the concrete when she fell to the ground. I would just like to point out, this is at least the third one I have talked about. One was where the killer, they had a tractor trailer death room, and it's always the woman forgets to chain them up when she goes to answer the phone or answer the door or whatever. And I'm like, did she forget? Now that I've seen this pattern emerging, I'm like, really? Did they forget? So Kate knocked on 3 neighbors' doors. Nobody was home. She was attacked by a dog in someone's front yard before she ran to a nearby shop and reported that she had been kidnapped and raped. She was terrified that Catherine was going to appear behind her at any moment and tell people, oh, this is my daughter. She's trying to run away from home. But the police were called and she was taken to the Palmyra police station. Lucky for her, it was Constable Laura Hancock's first day because the police did not believe her. I don't know what the fuck they need, but the police did not believe her. And they handed her over to Laura and they said, write her up for false reporting. However, Hancock believed her. She thought there were too many details, like the fact the Bernies had watched the movie Rocky. And the story was too horrible to be made up. So she made the case and convinced her fellow officers to take Kate seriously. And they brought in the officers who were investigating the disappearance of Denise Brown. And once they were brought in, they're like, oh, wow, this sounds hauntingly familiar. So a search warrant was obtained. They found a VCR tape of Rocky in the VCR. Details of the house matched what Kate had told them, including handcuffs in the bed and the sleeping pills she had hidden under the mattress. It was enough that the police brought the Bernies in and questioned them separately, and that was the key, to question them separately. Their stories diverged immediately. Catherine denied knowing who the hell Kate was, saying she had never met her. David, on the other hand, said Kate had come consensually to their home to engage in sex. Eventually, David broke, confessed, and told the police about the women they had killed and where they were buried. There were 2 other women who went missing in 1986 that authorities suspect. I'm sorry, I have a typo, and I'm like, what the hell is that
What was
word?
I trying to say? I don't know.
Anyway, authorities suspected might be attributed to the Bernies, but there was no proof. I'm not listing them because there was nothing to connect them. At the trial, David pled guilty to 4 counts of murder, 1 count of abduction, and 1 count of rape. He was sentenced to 4 terms of life imprisonment. Catherine received the same sentence. While in prison, David had to be moved at least once and was also kept separate from the general population. While they were in prison, the Bernies exchanged 2,600 letters, but had no other form of contact.
Wow. That's just like every day.
Yeah. So on October 7th of 2005, David hanged himself in prison. Catherine is still in prison, where she has been determined never to be released. She's only the 3rd Australian woman to receive that designation. She is now 72 years old and agitating for parole. And the person in charge of the prison system is like, no, you're not ever getting out.
You're here.
So
this is where you die.
Thanks to lobbying efforts from Kate Moore, Australian laws were changed. It used to be that I believe, and I apologize if I'm misstating this, it seems like even the worst criminals, everybody was automatically allowed to apply for parole every 3 years. Mm-hmm. Now it's been changed so that the worst criminals are no longer automatically able to apply. As of 2015, Kate Moore was an artist, a mom, a business owner, and a survivor. And she is still friends with Laura Hancock, the cop who believed her.
Good.
I loved that.
Absolutely.
I loved that detail.
They should still be friends.
Yes. She does not seem like I said, she lobbied and got the law changed, but she is not seeking out recognition. She's not seeking out the spotlight for any of this. She has given a few interviews, not in a very long time, but yeah, she just wants to live her life, and she considers herself a survivor, not a victim. So this actually came to me, the first glimpse I got of this case was from my True Crime a Day calendar. I haven't mentioned that one in a while. Of course, Wikipedia, news.com, which is an Australian site, and australia.lifestyle. So that just, so many things could have gone wrong and she could have not gotten away. It was just happenstance that they didn't kill her that night.
Right.
And I think it was, the murders all took place over like 5 weeks. And normally when you see serial killers, it doesn't start that fast. They don't.
Right. It builds up usually. Yeah. Or they've at least been doing something that they escalated from.
But in this one, there was no documented buildup. And there's no reason why Catherine got involved with it at all. Except she was entranced by...
Yeah, again, in those,
David.
There's usually somebody who's dominant. Clearly, he was the dominant in it.
Yes.
And they're influenced or forced in some state,
Yes.
So, yeah.
Although, yeah,
not abnormal.
Her and one of her children worked with Kate to get the laws changed, and has gone to the prison board or whatever body it is and said, do not
let my mother out.
Release her ever. A couple of her children have moved a couple of times because they were attacked.
Yeah, it drives me nuts that people attack the families of the criminals or whoever. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, they didn't have a part in it. And don't you understand that they're suffering too?
Yeah.
How would you like to realize that this is what your parents were doing?
Yeah.
How would you like to know that was happening under your nose and that these are your parents who you're supposed to love and are supposed to love and care for you?
And this was the woman who abandoned them.
Right.
She just walked away. And her first husband, I can't remember when, he passed away. I believe it was natural causes, but they never divorced. She just went and legally changed her name to Bernie. And I should have pointed out, at some point earlier in his early 20s, I believe, he did marry someone. He married a woman and they had a daughter together. But they did not stay married very long. And I'm trying to think, there was some mention of his daughter. But I think it was the same thing. She had to move because she got attacked because she was his daughter. Mm-hmm. She changed her name. That was it. Because she didn't want the last name Bernie. Because who would?
Right.
So
yeah, it's so stupid. Don't go after the people that did. Even when it's like, there have been a couple that we've had on here where we're like, oh, this person absolutely was the reason behind it, and they should have gotten in trouble too. Other than those ones, it's like they're usually just a hapless victim too,
especially
just
the children.
Kind.
But so it was a few episodes, not too many episodes ago, I talked about another survivor story, and I'm like, I think what makes these women different is that they don't accept defeat. They don't accept that they both probably thought they were going to die, but they both did everything they could.
Yeah.
Spitting out not swallowing the pills and then spitting them out and hiding them and making note of where everything is in the house and just trying to remember as many details as possible. She wasn't giving up. She was like, you might be taking me down, but I'm not going to go quietly.
I'm just going to go to sleep and let you do it.
And let you strangle me.
Right.
So.
Well, always good to have a survivor story, and it's not a bad place to end. It's like,
that's true.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year and all of that stuff that we didn't say.
Yes. Remember that in the new year, we will be coming out once a month on the 15th of the month.
So our next show is going to be the 15th.
January 15th.
All right. And we'll see how all that goes. And thanks, computer. Yeah.
So I can't say we'll talk to you next
2024.
week. We will. We'll talk to you next month.
Yeah. Crazy.
Have a good new year. Don't do anything too crazy.
But have fun. Don't drive drunk.
Have all the fun. Don't drive drunk. Yes, that's really what I should have said, because I'm like, oh, crazy has too many
definitions. There's too many connotations on that. What if I want to do something crazy?
Then you should.
But I don't want to drive drunk.
Don't drive drunk.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back next week with more shenanigans.